Hello and a warm welcome to Straight from the Heart, a podcast by Pragyan Advisory. I am Sunil Ganesh, your host. During the last several months, we have realized the importance of having focused and deep conversations. And taking a leaf out of the lessons learned, we have termed this new series as Conversations. In this series, we will take views and perspectives from leaders, experts around the topic of relevance in the space of leadership, team, and culture. As part of our Conversation podcast series, today we have a very special guest, somebody whom I deeply admire. He has been a board member for nearly 23 years as executive and as non executive director. He has also been a doyen of the human resources function who has shaped the practical HR thinking and has made it real and relevant for organizations, leaders, and people in general. He's a former chairman of GSK Consumer Healthcare Limited, was also the head of Group Human Capital, Max India, and formerly the CHRO of GlaxoSmithKline Consumer Healthcare. Dear listeners, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. P. Dwarakanath. Dwarka, welcome to Conversations.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you for having me here.
It's indeed a great pleasure. And as we had discussed, the theme of today's conversation is board culture and effectiveness in an increasingly VUCA world. Now, I know we realize that the VUCA word has been often misused for quite some time now. But the last 18 odd months have been quite a revelation for almost all of us. But what I would really start off, and I'm sure even our listeners would be very keen to know from you, 23 years on a company board, it would have, I presume, would have been quite a journey. So maybe we'd like to start from there. As you look back 23 years on company board, how has the journey been and what have been your reflections?
It's a great question, actually, Sunil, to ask me. I didn't realize that I've spent 23 years in the board of GlaxoSmithKline, nearly 23 years. I had a total experience of 41 years association with GlaxoSmithKline, out of which, if it's really more than half, I was on the board. Initially as an executive, later as a non-executive, independent director, also as a nominee of the GSK PLC and the chairman of ultimately as the chair of the company. I think for me, there are two important milestones there. One as an executive before I reached the level of board. I think one of the things I would strongly urge to most of the corporate is exposure to board is a great learning and important learning for all the promising leaders who want to take a leadership mantle. GSK has given me that opportunity to be on the board. What it really, if I start reflecting, there are different phases. If I start from 98, there's where the liberalization has happened and Indian economy started booming and we had this technological revolution and all that stuff. You see, the first few years were more as sort of a board consisting of more executives rather than the external members. And then when the regulations have been changed and proactively GSK 2001 has moved into a more, I would say, diverse board. We had many independent directors in the board, and which helped me to understand a couple of things. Firstly, being on the board, you will get a 360-degree view of the entire business, which as a HR executive may be limited, but you are looking from a strategic business perspective, looking to the various facets, be it people's issues, be it supply chain, be it quality, be it consumer focus, be it marketing, and so on. And the second is in terms of when you have external directors from 201, GSK had this unique ability to attract eminent people as a directors who have nothing to do with this company so that they can be unbiased and give a very macro perspective, not only about India, from a global perspective. I think this helped me to look various things, not inwardly in a silo basis, but looking from external perspective. How do you make a sustainable competitive advantage? Through innovation, through collaboration, through strategic alliance, and also try to see how to focus, strategic focus on business. One is to how to improve the current business, exploit it, and then explore for new businesses, which is not in the kitty. I mean, if you see at that time, we have made many innovations, even in the GlaxoSmithKline, not only from an operational and cost perspective, but also encouraging innovation. So this, I could learn it being present in the board. Otherwise, you learn this, you hear this, but you don't actually practice it. This helped. So in my view, and so on later, there is a different version. When you moved on, Saxon Valley, then this Enron issue came, then the whole global governance has changed. How ethical governance is important to a board. It is not only innovation, it is not only strategic focus, it's not only in a leadership and succession planning. How ethical governance is important. What happened in Enron's case, what happened later, Sajjam's case, or coupled with this, how a company like Lehman Brothers has collapsed due to lack of governance. Everything need not be a fraud. This helped me to understand one more element, which I was not very well conversant earlier, was on the risk management. If you don't manage the risk, the current, take stock of the current, take stock of the future, and have a competitor's intelligence in terms of business intelligence, how do you be competitively advantaged as compared to others? So to sum it up, I think it made me get a 360, a holistic view of the business, not only from internally, but also from an outside perspective. So if I have to say, in sum it up, it is how globalization can impact your business, how customization can create new businesses for you, and later when you come back on this, I will talk how the technological revolution has played an important role. Yes, last but not the least is how the ethical governance is important, not only to sustain business, but also to grow business to a new orbit.
Great. No, this is very useful because one can also see how the evolution in many ways of the focus and therefore the contribution typically unfolds. So that brings me to the situation that we are all dealing now, which is what happened or got triggered in 2020, which is COVID. And many people would say that while many of us would have read it in books as to what is VUCA, I think the last 18 months we experienced what VUCA is, the classical black swan event that we call. So the question that comes to my mind, and I'm sure might be there in other people's mind as well, is that as you look at this entire 18 odd months of COVID and its aftermath, what, according to you, were the top 2 or 3 observations that got your attention, especially around the leadership that boards had to provide during this period? Was it something very similar, or there was a significant shift? What did you observe, since you have that kind of an access and interactions with others? That would be something that I'll be very keen to know.
Very relevant question, Sunil. I think, fundamentally, yes, there was a fundamental shift happened in your thinking. It's a mindset change. Nobody thought in a manufacturing company, say, take FMCG, you have sales, marketing, and manufacturing, supply chain management, where the factories run into 70 to 24. We never thought that, there could be a hybrid working or a remote working and all that. But it all happened, and we thought that unless salesmen go to the wholesaler or to a retailer, you will not be able to drive the business. There is a paradigm shift. I tell you what, the shift has to started from the board itself. Board's mindset have to change. Everybody had one view till that time. This is the way we work. We are working very efficiently. we are very productive, we are cost effective, shareholders value is being given, customers are happy, stakeholders happy, right? But suddenly the whole changed and nobody expected that sort of a fundamental shift has happened. This where, the boards of the progressive boards have done, where it is, they have also first, they have to change their mindset, which some of them, and mindset cannot be, needs to be changed very quickly. I mean, it reminds me the Harvard Business Review quote, a leader is one who can cope up with change. I think, the question here was how quickly you change, the agility and speed with which adopt and adapt had to start from the board. I think progressive companies immediately said, oh, how people can work from home, let us do it. This is where the digitalization, the agility and speed with which you do it is important. This is where, I mean, for example, I was still as a chair of the board before I retired when pandemic has started. And, first question the board when we met together, it is not to, after the lockdown was imposed, it was not how is the business, what is the P&L, we are closing the financial, where are you? Now, those are not the questions. The first question in the board was how the well-being of the people. How are they, where are they, what sort of a support you want to give it to them. That enabling culture to provide that inspirational leadership has to start from the top. That is from the board. This is where the point, which you always talk in many forums, leadership culture has to do with this, how board also thinks about it. I mean, the first question is not with P&L, please, are you able to close it? Are you able to sustain our profits? It's not the question. How are the people? What steps are you taking to ensure the safety and well-being of the people? And I want to say this is a paradigm shift, Sunil, which has happened. I realized at a very late in my stage, and nearly after 49 years of corporate, just before the retirement, I couldn't have imagined that a strategic alliance, strategic issue relating to the board has to be discussed in a Zoom call rather than a physical. It was a mandatory earlier to have a physical meeting for some of the issues, especially when you're divesting some products of the company, as you know. So I think, that mindset has to started from the board. Progressive companies immediately adopted, and given the comfort, this is where, what is it CEOs and the leadership team are looking, how the board is thinking, what is the comfort? Is the board is asking, the first question is, show me P&L, or is talking about take stock of the people and well-being? Because the premise is, if you take care of your people, they will deliver the results to you. Then, we can, that inspirational leadership with a compassion and empathy has to start from the top. That is where the board level starts. So the companies who immediately jumped into the fray, adopting and adapt to this new environment, which takes some time, the speed and agility some of them have shown is remarkable. So for me, the challenges was, first, take care of the well-being of the people. Secondly, how to take stock of the business. What are the key steps we took without too much of disruption to make the business going? And secondly, how do you communicate to all your stakeholders? And here I would like to hand, it did not end with the so-called permanent workforce, and it is extended to the so-called extended workforce or the contingency workforce, including, in case of wholesalers, salespersons, or contractor workers. And it did not end with the family or immediate family. There are people who have been supportive to the parents and to the kith and kin of the people. So many things have been done. So the mindset of centered from physical health, not only physical health, but also mental health, where for the children, how the, so these are the key challenges, I think, which you said. It doesn't mean, and so to sum it up, it's a where the paradigm shift have taken fate in the mindset, It is how do you balance between the lives and livelihoods? Number one, how do you make the balance embrace between art of tough love, tough on issues, but also soft on people? You can't just throw away business and just to be liberated, then companies should not collapse. Then how do you move from command and control leadership to empowerment? And secondly, it's how do you help networking rather than doing in silos and the leadership? So there are a lot of aspects which have been talked about but ignored have come into play during this, the empowerment. There is a distributed leadership or a liquid leadership, what we call the situation leadership has emerged. And there is a visibility to many people that you see we are also part of the game, and there is a stakes for it. So these are my top line views if you ask me. Then of course you talk about the operational excellence, cost management, efficiencies, and hybrid working and all. So I think the progressive boards have moved on very fast. So agility with compassion and empathy were the key drivers, and encourage the leadership team to do the well and support them not to worry about the results in the short term, look for a long-term benefits.
Great. I think that was quite a significant point, especially when you focus on that aspect of mindset and how quickly the boards shifted gears, if I were to use the phrase, to make that happen. That therefore triggers a thought, which essentially is also to the core to the conversation that we are having, which is about the culture in a board. And therefore, the piece that was playing in my mind, and I would like to have your views on this, is that we all know that organizations have their distinct, unique cultures, even subcultures, depending on what is the kind of business they are in from a geography standpoint, etc., etc. How much of the board culture, one, should be shaped by the organization's culture, or should it have a distinct culture of its own, or is the truth somewhere in between? What's your sense when it comes to board culture?
Okay. Ideally, from my experience, the culture of any organization should be driven top down. Tone at the top is important. You need to lead by example. Okay. For example, I think we are all familiar, but if you permit me, I'll start from there and I'll move forward. See, what is the vision of the company? What is the purpose? It's the paradigm shift also happened, profit with purpose. It was earlier profit, now the VUCA world has said profit hona chahiye, but you should also have the purpose. So if you take, SmithKline Beecham merger, just as a reference point, our global quest is to improve the quality of human life by enabling people to do more, live longer, and healthier. So the focus is quality of human life. How do you enhance the quality of human life? They said, they're based on their research, based on their thinking, the board and the leadership team. I think to create a culture, board alone per se should not create a culture and cannot drive it, because they can create a strategy, create a culture, but it has to be driven by the CEO and the leadership team down the line. So it has to be co-evolved. That is what happened in case of Bob Bowman and Henry Wendt, chairman and the CEO at that time, SmithKline Beecham. They worked together to create this culture. So, when you say there are subcultures, it is true in any organization, there could be subcultures. As long as subcultures are not inconsistent with the overarching theme of the organization, namely why we are in this business, what are the key strategic values or leadership practices of the company. For example, pharma culture could be slightly different in some aspects based on the business context and situation, geography, and other external factors. But consumer could be different because it's based on what competitors do to gain a competitive advantage. But the overall culture of the organization cannot be inconsistent with the subcultures, with the main culture. So to answer you, board cannot create a culture for its own and then ask the others to have a different cultures. The primary objective of the board is to ensure the vision and the mission or the purpose of the organization is carried through. This is where hardwiring the soft stuff, to use the phrase from Simply Better, is means you can have values which can be done co-partnering with the leadership team and the CEO, but how to execute it should leave it to the management teams. This is where this hard stuff, whether structures, systems, processes, leadership practices, principles, will come. But overarching theme of the value, if you say we believe in peoples, that means teamwork, cohesion, strategy. You can't say we will not work in collaboratively, but we'll work and we'll deliver results. That may not be the future. So, but you are right. These things can happen if the board is not effective and efficient. You see, one of the things I learned was directors look for effective solutions and the managements look for efficient solutions. So one of the things you need to see for the directors is how to balance between effectiveness and efficiency. But suppose, if the leadership team says, I want to do optimizing the cost at the cost of people in the sense touching, breaching the values of the people, then, a board has to interfere. As long as within the dovetailing into it, you should work it, because there is a very thin line if you are not manage it well. The culture, what you said is, board has to create one culture in order to achieve this common purpose along with the leadership team and the CEO and others. Are we creating a board governed culture or board managed culture or board led culture? I think fundamental principle is there. If that is very clear, ideally, it should be a board governed culture. Board should ask incisive questions, probe, but what is the strategy you have to do for both short term and long term should leave it to the CEO and his leadership team based on data, competitive intelligence, and come and present. This is where you need to ask the right and leading questions to them. It is not to challenge them, but to make them feel there are different ways of looking at it. This is where the outside in view perspective, diverse board experiences would help. I may ask some questions on law, governance, and people-centric approach. Somebody who got a manufacturing or a CEO of an automobile company may ask you operational efficiency, cost effectiveness. Marketing guy ask about the strategy, brand, products, product mix, and so on. Finance can come on something. So this is the beauty. The culture of the organization is not what you drive from the purpose, how you create that sort of diverse team with a good leader as a chair of the company who needs to facilitate and create the link between the CEO and the leadership team. And unfortunately, some cases, the chairman and the board tend to become board manager, board-led organization, which is not ideal in the given circumstances. It needs to be created a distinct chambers. Here I would say, I strongly recommend Court Commission's recommendation that the chair of a company should be different from the CEO or the MD of the company. That gives you an outside-in perspective, more unbiased view, and he would be able to bring the bring the diverse views and also manage the board. Sometimes the important aspect to succeed is the effectiveness of the board as a team, not as a. You understand? This is where the chair has to do it and also work very closely with the chair, with the MD or the CEO of the company without trespassing into area. So this where, so to answer you, you can have some subcultures, but those cultures ultimately should align with the overarching theme of the company.
Great. In fact, Pragyan, you touched upon the theme that I was going to pick up next, and thank you for leading us into it. We all see boards as comprising people of certain eminence. These are typically people who have done things, seen it, done it, and have created a name. That's typically how boards get people from outside as well. And therefore, when you have people of such eminence coming in, making them to work as a team and thereby demonstrating the culture which adds value. In your experience and being the chairman of GSK Consumer, how did you go about doing this? I'll be very interested in knowing your practical experiences of making this happen on ground.
Um, Again, it's a very challenging question. There is no one right answer because I have seen as a board member, as the chair of the NRC, as the chair of the CSR committee, and I have been virtually chairing most of the subcommittees of the company. Even there, we see that people will come with a diverse views.
Correct.
You should encourage debate. That is the reason why you are having a very diverse.
Absolutely.
Sometimes executives who are on the board, I mean, they are professionals, but they are also guided by certain processes which they have to follow. But whereas the independent director, it doesn't mean that you got independence, you can say what you want, number one. And secondly, while you're saying it, there are elements which you need to be careful. You need to understand this is where being a HR guy helped me a lot to manage as a chair of the company, because you need to understand the psyche of each board member, their strengths and their weaknesses, and what are the touch points where we need to have. Everything you can't decide in a board, Sunil. What I used to do it, if there is a thing which I would expect the CEO or the concerned functional head to raise it with me in advance, and then try to assess what are the issues which can come. Because for 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes it may not, outcomes cannot come just like that, even though the papers have been sent. I used to discuss quite a lot one-to-one with the experts. For example, is an issue on a taxation. I used to talk to the chair of the audit committee, who is an expert and eminent in this, to take his views whether what management is proposing is fair and ethical, or is there any challenges you see from a business perspective also. So I think, when you talk to one-to-one, you should allow debates to happen, but ultimately the decision should be by consensus rather than by votes. Then it creates to more bickering, or it may not give a very congenial and a very harmonious relationship for the future. They should not create a win-lose situation. They may agree to disagree, but there is a rationale. They understand what the majority of the people are saying. So there is a consensus. So it is, I would say, ultimately, chair of the board one need not have the entire depth and understanding of every core function, but he should have it. What is the culture and what are the key processes? But how do you manage different board members and to bring them together under one roof and have a healthy discussion is more important. Then you are able to achieve. They will also go the end. I have been heard. I may have a different view, but I agree in view of what others have said.
Interesting. So in this context, PDN, are there certain things that one may need to be mindful, more from the standpoint of getting into this challenge of either overdoing something or underdoing something? What will be your view on that?
Can you just elaborate?
So for example, as you mentioned that encouraging debate is a very important aspect of this, because the idea is to encourage that cognitive diversity that exists in the system, get all views in. But some may argue that if one is not mindful, you may have endless debates because you want all perspectives and no convergence may happen. So are there any guidance to say, okay, let's not overdo this or let's not underdo this?
Yes, do's and don'ts, let me say. The fundamental, I think, one of the things I would recommend also is that, it's always good to have, for example, there are two specialists in a financial aspect. This proposal is to have a huge financial aspect. I would definitely request CFO and CEO to have a chat with them to explain him the further, because when you send the papers, that itself will not explain a couple of things. What is the context? What is the background? That will help him also saying, that this organization is paying attention. They're just not throwing the proposal at me, but trying to explain. And secondly, having discussed all this, allow healthy debate. You are right. Time is the essence. You can't have sometimes what happens, it goes, the whole focus is shifted on a very minor issue and keep on debating endlessly and lose the material and substantial questions which needs to be addressed in the board meeting. So one thing I'm clear, I don't mind having hours of discussion by these executives with the concerned people. There are kinds of people who would like to know more about it. Some people, without having further knowledge, may get panic. How can we do this? For example, especially on the related party transactions and all that, we need to clarify it, sensitive matters. So once you do it, as a chair, you need to be heard enough. You can't have an endless debate. And in the process, sometimes the two is give adequate time, adequate notice to hear every view, but ultimately have a debate and have an ending time for this. Otherwise, it will not go. See, you will not be able to satisfy on every aspect everybody. But overall, you should give opportunities to them, express the views, and then ultimately what is right as a collective wisdom we need to go. Similarly, I would say one thing to executives, don't come in the last minute and don't say this has to be done today because of a compliance or a governance issue. And secondly, then board will be very jittery and they will not be comfortable. Then it's difficult to manage for the chair as well. And the second aspect is sometimes, strategy, long-term perspectives, business interests, where they're paramount, it has to be done properly, not in piecemeal. Or do operational issues first and come with the strategy in the lead. Most of the directors get upset. What is our strategy? Have you articulated? For me, in order to achieve, first have a broad strategy. If there is a significant change because of pandemic or VUCA board, those can be always said. Don't go on operational issues alone and bring strategic issues in the end of the meeting, which may feel very people comfortable. Sometimes some of the executives tend to do it. That as a chair you need to create. Then it gives more confidence to the other board members that chair has been fair and balanced and he is giving opportunity to everyone.
Got it. In fact, the thing as you were articulating this, and what I like was the perspective that you highlighted about board focusing on the effectiveness and often the organization's management focusing on the efficiency part. So that brings me to that aspect of effectiveness as you described. So there is a history, there is an evolution that you spoke of. There is also this 18-odd month that happened, which triggered some things specifically around the mindset. As you see ahead, what do you think typically would be the board effectiveness agenda? What are the kind of things that you see will beginning to unfold post this pandemic? Because I'm sure, like most of us, that someday we will come out of this. This will also have its end, the pandemic. So it will, in some sense, come back to a certain sense of normalcy. What would then be the board effectiveness agenda? How do you think that unfolding now?
It's a very, very, very interesting question. A very interesting question, Sunil. Risk management. When you say risk management, now we have experienced risk, we'll be very conscious at least for next 2-3 years, right? Nobody predicted that you will be devastated by this pandemic about 2 years back. And none of the agendas, even the government agendas were not there. So suddenly we said, but we should not overdo it. But what would the risk management things which can, we have to think both long-term and short-term as a board in order to guide and make it efficient for the management. So the risk management is one aspect. The second one I would say is getting grasp on competitive intelligence. I think, one is how do you sustain and run your existing businesses, but how do you also do it? These businesses may need to undergo change. For example, you are doing tobacco business, you want hotels or or other businesses. So like this, what are the other competitive advantages, provided you have the competencies and capabilities to get it in one day. Then defining company strategy for next 2 years. What is the strategy which you need to do? And at the same time, talk about the leadership and succession planning. Take stock about your talent and see how they are able to meet. If you're starting exploring a new business opportunities with innovation, do you have people with that innovative mindset, whether it is in a R&D in a pharmaceutical company or a product guys in a FMCG companies? And ethical governance. What are the parameters? How do you measure the effectiveness of the board and also of the management team performance goals? And how do you do risk and reward management? These are the 5 factors which I would like to say on this. But these are governed by it, Sunil, since you're talking about the efficiency part, you need to digitalize, otherwise you will die. Digitalization is one important. Then consumerization. And to go further, what do you mean, sir, new businesses and all? Consumerization. What is the consumers are looking for? Are they looking for our products the way we are delivering it, or there is a change? If they change, what is the change? How can we are ahead of the game? That's thirdly, globalization. I think, if you see, we are suffering from the chips are not available. Automobile industry is suffering. And there was a power outage in China. Because of it, the chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry has impacted. You see, this is all monopolized in few countries, whole global supply chain, in our anxiety to drive. Now you need to bring Atmanirbhar, self-confidence, manufacture in India, have an integrated approach. Don't depend too much on this, because if somewhere one country collapses, whole global chain collapses. Those are the learnings from the VUCA world. We need to implement it as a strategy. There should be an execution of that document, optimization of cost in investment on new. Maybe we need to start doing some of our parts here itself, rather than when iPads could not be available because there was a lockdown. Such situations should not happen when there is a demand for such markets. So the consumerization, globalization with the digitalization is very important. And also to see the mindset of people. I mean, I'm not talking as HR guy, but I'm talking as the chair of a company, having been in the board. You see differential generations. You're dealing with different generations, and also gig workers and platform workers. So the whole gamut of workplace, workers have changed. Who thought when we introduced in Smithkline Beecham, we said flexible working, it's considered to be a great thing, but now it's very ordinary. How the challenge now is how to bring back some of the employees back to the work, which will be a big challenge because people are used to a certain comfort and seen as a entitlement mentality. To it in need of our business, it's also requirement to get that cohesion and teamwork. Is to get the touch and the smell of the place is the challenge.
Interesting. So in fact, as you were describing this, I realized that in the coming years, we will have more and more executives and members becoming parts of boards, considering the expansion and explosion around the startup world and the organizations that are coming in. Some may find this entire space very exciting. Some may find it a bit unnerving as well. Oh God, if these are all the things that I need to be careful about and be mindful of. What would be, basis your experience, be some of the guidance that you might want to give to these so-called aspiring members who will now want to be part of boards? What would be your guidance to them?
I think you need to experience the board management. Unfortunately, in India, for many reasons, or maybe globally to a large extent, the board representation in the board may not be formal even as an invitee, or everybody cannot become a board member because of the numbers and regulatory issues. You get in the touch and the feel and the smell of the board, how a board operates in order to really aspire to become, it's very important. I have few comments on this because I was very fortunate. GSK has given me this opportunity. I think this is where I learned. What you learned as a management team member is one aspect, but what you learn as a board is a very different learning. It's one step ahead of it in terms of what is it what is it? Is it one is how a outsider, a eminent lawyer comes and talks, how a bureaucrat comes and talks, what his perspectives, what are his insights. This will make you feel very comfortable. When you become a board member, you will not overawed by the situation, whether I should open my mouth or not. But only thing is, first you need to observe when you sit in the board, understand it is like playing cricket, if you ask me. It depends on the pitch, it depends on the bowlers, it depends on the captain, depends on the batsman. Like this, you need to do it. That sort of experience, unless you go through it, you will get it. So my suggestion is twofold here. Observe, aspire, but not to just to get a status, but to enhance your knowledge, and also to see what are the board dynamics, how it board operates. The last but not the least is said, you should be by rotation, I would say, or invite them as a permanent invitees by rotation to the board of a company to get that exposure. And at least at the senior levels, some of the organizations should allow them to take a non-executive role in another company which is not competing with them. That would also give them an outside-in perspective and also ability to network with different kinds of eminent people to get that board level perspective. It is not a rocket science, but you need to experience to earn it.
Interesting. I think that I'm sure would be quite useful for many of our listeners who would be looking at this particular aspect as well of joining board sometime in their careers. So that was very, very useful, PD, and I think it has been quite an enlightening and I must say quite an energizing conversation. And I have known you for so many years, and I think any conversation with you always leaves a lot of positivity, hope, and energy. And thanks a lot for making time for this particular conversation. And I'm sure our listeners would also have found some of these pointers very, very interesting and very, very useful. So thanks a lot. So with this, we'll come to the end of this particular edition of Conversations. Thanks a lot to all our listeners. Goodbye. Stay safe till the time we meet next. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.